Welcome, our dear friends from the Great Northern Plains region. Grateful to be here with our dear friend Jeff Miller and out of Greeley. And we're excited to be in Doctrine and Covenants sections 41 through 44. These are definitely some important sections as we're getting into the Kirtland area, as they've arrived and as now are going to establish some new laws, even the law of consecration. So, Jeff, we know there's one lesson the manual tells us to teach out of 41, and then two out of 42. But just kind of based on teachers where you're at with the life prep lessons as well as assess your learnings, you can adapt as necessary. But grateful to hear what Jeff has for us. So, Jeff, it's all yours.
Thanks, Brandon. We're having some fun technology challenges, and so I'm out in a little teeny town in northeastern Colorado. So we're going to make some adaptations and hope that that's maybe helpful for you to see that even we're making adaptations. Um, and I also made a PowerPoint that has disappeared, and so what a great opportunity for you to see uh, what to do when technology goes poorly. So grateful for this opportunity, and we're going to jump right in.
Okay.
I'm just going to share a brief outline and kind of go through this with Brandon, but I want to start with just some of the notes that I took. So I want you to see that for me personally, when I read through something, I've got my first read, and it's just stuff for me. I try to read for me first, and then my second read will go into the curriculum and start to do some of the how. So my first and second reads, I look for what I want to teach and what's emphasized in the curriculum. Second one, I start and third reads, I start to go in and how am I going to do this? So one of the things that I found in the curriculum, and I don't know that I can switch over very well to different screens, so you just have to trust me that this is in the curriculum. But when you look at the overview, it encourages you to have your students look for opportunities this week to recognize the Lord's love, power, and mercy in their lives. So just like at the high schools your students are going to, there's like spirit weeks and theme weeks and stuff. For me, if I'm teaching this week, my theme this week is recognizing the Lord's love, power, and mercy in my life. And I might, if I'm a teacher, put that on top of the board. I might make a little poster. I've just got it. I'm going to do something a little bit different so they know that, hey, we've got a theme week this week, and that's what it is. So as I'm focusing on the Lord's love, power, and mercy, I'm going to start in section 41. And I just want you to do this with me. Brandon, let's just have a quick conversation. But question that I would ask that's slightly different in the curriculum, and we're going to get to the curriculum in a minute. But I just want you to think, Brandon, and then give me a couple thoughts.
Okay.
Right here's this question. What do you think that God enjoys most about being God? I have thoughts right here, but I genuinely want to know what's on, like, what do you think God enjoys most about being God?
Well, the best way to look at this for me is if I were to say, what do I enjoy most about being a dad? And that is for sure watching my children succeed in life. Just watching them have those little mini joys, wins, victories, even the trials and difficulties, but watching them struggle and then get through it, like that just makes me so happy. So I can imagine for God, it's the same. Just watching us be happy, watching us win, turn our lives over to Him. That's what I would say.
I want you to go back to your teenage self. And I realized that you got baptized a little bit later in life, but still as a teenager. How might you answer that question? Or how do you think maybe some of our students would answer that question? What do you think God
Oh,
is about being
punishing me.
God?
No. Some kids might think that he enjoys punishing us or making life
Yeah,
difficult for us, and but we know that's not true.
right. So there could be a myriad of experiences. And if your students say and share, I think God enjoys punishing me, that's okay. Be okay with sometimes where kids are at and where they're struggling with God, and maybe even ask them about it. I don't know. You have to know where you're comfortable. But Elder Holland said this in a talk called "Laborers in the Vineyard." He said, "Surely the thing God enjoys the most about being God is the thrill." I love that idea. The thrill of being merciful, especially to those who don't
Mm,
expect it and often don't feel they deserve it. We're going to learn a lot about God in these sections.
mm,
And we're going to learn a lot about recognizing his love, his power, and his mercy as it pertains to commandments. And sometimes our students don't always connect God's love with God's commandments, but him giving me commandments is a manifestation of his thrill of being merciful and supporting me. Here's the background, Brandon, for some of these sections. You mentioned it. This comes directly from the curriculum, and if it's me as a teacher, I'm going to ask my students to read it. So, Brandon, would you just read the background? And we're not going to look for anything specific other than I just want you to know what's happening.
Okay.
Where is the church? Where is Joseph?
In December 1830, the Lord commanded the saints to move to Ohio. That was in section 37. A short time later, in January and February 1831, the prophet Joseph Smith and his wife Emma traveled hundreds of miles to Kirtland, Ohio. The prophet then received revelation giving some instructions as the saints from other areas began settling in Kirtland.
So it's a time of change, it's a time of transition, and the Lord wants to let the people know how much he cares about them and how he feels about them. Some of you might have some graduating seniors that are getting ready. I feel like for me, every time I've had a significant change in my life, the Lord has done such a good job at communicating how he feels about me during those times. And sometimes our graduating seniors feel like they're left alone or they're just left to be by themselves. But I want to invite you to encourage those graduating seniors to look for how the Lord is communicating his love as they make some of those big changes in their lives. Because that's what he did for Joseph and the saints. They were all packing up and making some big changes. So, Brandon, can we go to section 41, verse 1? And remember, we're looking for how thrilled God is to be merciful and bless his children. Will you read verse 1 for us? And let's look for how the Lord feels about blessing us as his children.
Hearken and hear, O ye my people, saith the Lord and your God, ye whom I delight to bless with the greatest of all blessings, ye that hear me, and ye that hear me not will I curse, that have professed my name with the heaviest of all cursings.
Brandon, what do you see there as far as how the Lord feels about blessing his children?
He loves and delights to bless those that hear him. If I was a teenager, I'd be like, but wait, it sounds like he also delights in cursing those that don't want to hear him.
Tell me about that, Brandon. What do you see in there?
Yeah, he just says, but those that don't hear me, I'm going to curse you, and with the heaviest of all cursings. And so we might look at that as a punishment, but maybe what the Lord is saying is because you're not listening and I want to bless you, I'm going to do something to cause you to learn how to listen so that I can bless you next time.
What do you see about, and Brandon, what do you think when the Lord says, I delight to bless you? What comes to mind when you see that phrase? He delights to bless those that hear him.
I see him smiling and like almost getting giddy at sending you that little tender mercy that you don't deserve or, that you didn't expect, and just seeing him just so happy.
Brandon, let's not shy away from the other part right there. What is that whole verse in context teach you about how the Lord feels about his children and the lengths that he goes to bless his children?
Yeah, it just shows me that he, again, his work and his glory is to bring us home. And so those tender mercies and those blessings will always be little ways to keep us on the path and to reward us for following him and listening to him.
Even if I'm choosing not to hear him, he'll give me opportunities and ways to draw me back to him.
Yep.
So even there, I think that he still thrills in the mercy of giving us opportunities to come, multiple opportunities to come back.
Right.
Brandon, you can see my lesson outline, but what are some of the ways that we can hear him?
I can hear him by hearing his prophets, by taking opportunities to always be up to date on what the prophet has taught us, reviewing my general conference talks, being in the scriptures, and then I think in meaningful prayers.
Here's what President Nelson said in a recent general conference talk that's called Hear Him. So you mentioned a couple, right? We can go to the scriptures and we can deepen that. But Brandon, will you just start right here, this part? And you mentioned the other thing that he mentioned, right? Heeding the words of prophets, seers, and revelators. But let's go right here and tell me why this might add a thought.
We can also hear him in the temple. The house of the Lord is a house of learning. There the Lord teaches in his own way.
What does that add to maybe what you shared already?
Yeah. If I'm in his house, it's a lot easier to hear him.
Right? and the Lord teaches us in his own way there. Brandon, we want to come back to that theme now for just a minute. As we focus on our ability to hear him, how does focusing on hearing him help us recognize his love, his mercy, and his power in our lives? So you mentioned a couple ways that you do that. So how does searching the scriptures, general conference, going to the temple to hear him. How has one of those things helped you focus on his love, power, and mercy?
For me recently, I think it's just been general conference because as I'm making that effort, right, and that's where it goes back to verse one, those that are trying to hear him, like we now easily can recognize his mercy, his power, blessings in our life. But if I'm just going about my day without even trying to focus on him, I may have missed, he may have still blessed me and loved me, but I may have missed it because I'm not even trying to listen. I'm not even trying to focus on him. And so scriptures, temple, all of those things are a means to the end of his love. And so if we remove the means, we may miss the end.
So I'm going to just pause the experience a little bit right there. There's a couple things that as a teacher, Brandon, by the way, thank you. As I pause, I focused on and I just rewrote a couple questions that I thought were helpful, and you might not see them as overly helpful. But the other question I wrote is, as you hear the Lord's voice, tell me about a time He communicated His love, power, and mercy to you. And now that's going to, for Brandon, if I were to ask you that, that's going to be a different type of experience, right? But I wrote out both those questions as a means of just helping me figure out ways to have students have an experience with the
Right.
Lord and His love and His mercy. This one, I chose to use the word strive from like our temple recommend.
Hmm.
So if you strive to hear the Lord's voice in your life, when have you felt, His love, power, and mercy? I wrote these questions and then I rewrote them and then I rewrote them a couple different times just so that I could get to a point where I could ask students about a time that they have felt it. And I, as a teacher, I try to assume that they have had experiences with the Lord's voice
Yeah.
and hearing Him, and that when they heard Him, they felt an increase of love, of mercy, or power in their life. And
So,
sometimes if I have a young class, I'll ask that question, but then I'll also say, or maybe someone in your family, just so that they can think about maybe I don't know that I've had experiences here, but I know that my mom and dad have,
yeah.
and maybe they can share that.
And I would say because these are such powerful questions and can be personal, it might even be a good opportunity to say, would you mind writing it down first? Write down a story or a time when, and then ask your question. And that way they have time to ponder and write before they raise their hand and share or share with their neighbor.
Yeah, beautiful. One of the other questions was, I don't want to shy away from verse one talks about some consequences, right?
Yeah.
Um, I don't want to shy away from those as a teacher, so I have a question in there specific to maybe going back to that, just so that students know I'm willing and interested in talking about some things that maybe they have questions about.
Yeah.
So we're going to pause right there. Other opportunities for students to recognize the Lord's love and power and mercy. Let's go to section 42. This is where the Lord reveals His law
Hmm.
uh, to the people to help them organize, including, Brandon, you mentioned the law of consecration. So, because I'm only going to choose a part of the curriculum, I went right to the middle of the second lesson, and we're just going to start right there. So, Brandon, let's go to verse 29, section
Okay.
42, verse 29. Let's just jump right in. So, according to verse 29, why should I keep the Lord's commandments? Can I read it and
Yeah,
then
please.
you answer that? Verse 29, if thou lovest me, thou shalt serve me and keep all my commandments. So, Brandon, what do you see there?
If kind of John 14:15. If you love me, keep my commandments. So I keep his commandments because I love him, not out of fear, but out of love.
Maybe the rest of you, jot that down in your margins or highlight it. And if your students don't know how to link, you can show them how to link that in their verses, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so the curriculum says this verse teaches that we keep the Lord's commandments. We show our love for Him. So now remember our theme this week is recognizing the Lord's love, mercy, and power. One of the ways I've just learned is I can recognize His love by showing love for Him. And I do that by keeping the commandments.
Hmm.
So I can point that out as a teacher. And then the curriculum suggests putting students in a group to answer the following. So here's the situation after we've read that verse and we're looking for what it means to be obedient, and all of that's right there in the curriculum. So I put them in small groups, and here's what I share with them. Just I have on a PowerPoint slide or something right here to help us make good decisions, good choices. God gives us commandments. He does this because He loves you. And the best reason to obey the commandments is because you love Him. Love is at the heart of God's commandments. This comes from the For Strength of Youth. So then I'm going to give my students in groups, probably in pairs, an opportunity to talk about these two questions. How are God's commandments a manifestation of his love? And how does our obedience to God's commandments show my love for him? So, Brandon, just 30 seconds. Can we
Hmm.
just talk about these two ideas? And then I want to share some additional questions that I thought of. Again, I wrote them 2 or 3 times just to get to where I felt I was comfortable. So,
Sure.
Brandon, how are God's commandments a manifestation of his love and mercy and power?
I would say hymn number 308 helps us understand. Is it 308 or three?
As I
Yeah.
have loved you.
As I have loved you, or oh, maybe it's 303. What's 303? Just the idea that keeps us safe. Again, going back to, I'm trying to understand this more as a father. I don't give my children commandments or laws to restrict them, but I do it because I recognize there's something else out there that can harm them. And so laws keep us on the path. Laws keep us safe. And he's doing that out of love because he sees what else is out there.
So it's got a bigger view,
Yeah, absolutely.
just that vision. And as we think about how our obedience to God's commandments show him how we love him, any thoughts there on that, Brandon?
And I love when we sometimes put this on a spectrum of why we obey. And for some, it's blind faith, blind obedience. For some, it's out of fear. But then it hopefully eventually gets to, I do it because I just love him and I trust him. And I think that that love and that trust comes from past experiences when we recognize, oh, by keeping that law, I really do see how it protected me and kept me safe and showed me his love. So now, as I look at other laws that are being introduced to me or covenants, I now can do it out of love because I see that he's always done things out of love.
Draw near unto me, and I will draw near unto you, and I draw near unto him in many ways by keeping his commandments. Right.
Absolutely.
As a teacher, then, as we've talked this, I these aren't questions that are in the curriculum, but these are questions that I felt would be important for my students to think about. And if I were to share these in class, it would be similar to what Brandon described. This is something I'm writing in a journal. I'm giving students to think about. And I wrote these questions 1 or 2 or 3 times. They're not perfect, and I would continue to hone. But what is a commandment? Well, okay, let me back up. The reason I wrote these questions is because I want my students to consciously connect showing love for God by keeping the commandments. But doing that consciously helps me recognize God's love and mercy and power in my life.
Hmm.
So that's why I wrote these questions. I just wanted to connect it back to the theme of the week. So here's the question. One, what is a commandment you're currently striving to keep that helps you feel God's love? And then the second one is, what commandment do you love to keep because of what you feel when you do?
Hmm.
And I might even change that to say, what commandment do you keep because of how it helps you feel about God, or something similar to that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it'd be good, like with this, to do like case studies. Pick a commandment, pick a standard from for the strength of youth. Do exactly these two questions. How does this commandment teach, whether you're living it or not, but just a case study, how does it help you see God's love? How does the law of chastity help you see God's love, which is, one of the laws that's given in section 42 that goes through it quite a bit. How does the law of tithing, like, 'cause some people might look at it again as, how does tithing bless me? It's giving him money. It's giving the church money. And so just looking at it through that angle of how does this law help me feel his love? And how can I better show my love for him by keeping that love?
Well, so that's it. I wanted you to see that when the teacher manual gives you suggestions about maybe this week you can focus on helping your students recognize God's love. It's not a big change. It's not a significant change, but as I go through the curriculum, I might just be able to add in 1 or 2 questions that I've written that really help my students draw back to the fact that commandments really do help me recognize God's love and mercy in my life.
Mm, absolutely.
Anyway, so
Very
that's the idea. That's the teaching skill that I would encourage you to think about is, the curriculum suggests a certain skill, and maybe that's your theme for the week, and everything that you do helps your students think about God's love
yeah.
and mercy or whatever. Anyway, thanks,
Uh,
Brandon. That's it.
Thank you, Jeff, and we really appreciate you giving us these ideas. And I don't know if you'd be comfortable sharing your Microsoft document or that document you had with your notes on it with everybody, but so they
Sure.
can kind of see these questions. But teachers, this is a great opportunity to teach love and His power and His mercy. I'm grateful for that theme. Law of consecration is a big one, and helping them see a little bit, not just the details of how the law worked, but how all laws, again, point back to his love will be important. So thank you, teachers. Thank you, Jeff. We sure appreciate you. We hope you have a wonderful week, and God bless.